Hi, this is Diane Scott, and welcome to the Best Boss podcast. Today, I'm very fortunate to have one of the greatest leaders I've ever met. And she's not going to like that, but she'll get over it. Her name is Paula Neimann. She is the head of talent, the global portfolio division of Takeda. So welcome, Paula.
Thanks, Diane. Nice to see you.
Paula, tell me about yourself. Tell the listeners what you do.
Well, I am the head of global talent for global portfolio division of Takeda. We are one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and I am responsible for the learning and talent management organization, um, including 77 countries, about 9,000 employees within the division, and setting that strategy and then building out how we bring learning and talent across the organization.
That's a lot of bosses that you're in charge of. And our work with around the Best Boss podcast is really talking about the qualities of becoming a best boss and what you can do to increase those qualities. Let me just start with your work. Talk to me about the best bosses that you see within Takeda, and especially in a global and multicultural organization.
Sure. So the best bosses that I see across the global organization are those that um, are very communicative, share their vision, are responsive, understand kind of how to move from theory to actual application or execution of how things need to happen. That's actually one of my favorite sayings is in theory that should work, but in reality, it takes a little bit more work. I think it's those that respond to what the needs are and actually take action, and share their vision so that their teams know where they're going, but also understand what their teams need in order to get there.
So it really does start with you set the vision and you work with the teams to achieve it.
Yes, you set the vision, but then you have to know where your team is in order to get there effectively. So where do you need to meet them before you actually can achieve that vision, and how do you support them to be successful in doing that?
How do you do that from like a global perspective? And I actually I'm thinking a lot with, because you're head of global talent and you're located in Chicago. How do you do that, especially if you're a global, multicultural, and often remote leader? Like, one of the biggest things that my listeners have talked about is leadership when you're not physically together. What are the qualities that you see that really have helped define success in that space, in the remote leadership space?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard having that leadership when you are not in the same office as anyone, right? So our offices moved from Deerfield to Boston about 5 years ago. My role was able to stay remote because my people are everywhere, and I'm grateful for that. What's been hard is creating, it takes an extra effort in terms of creating those relationships, especially when you don't have that face to face. Let's grab lunch, let's grab coffee, being together in meetings and having kind of that banter back and forth. It takes a ton of effort. It takes extra phone calls. The video helps, um, but it's a lot more work. I'll tell you when I actually do, and I think you have to be more intentional with meetings and ways of working and setting up how we're going to operate and how we're going to communicate. I think that can't be taken for granted for anybody in a remote role, so that people are clear and you're able to build that trust and that collaboration, and showing the vulnerability that you have so that you don't necessarily have all of the answers, that you're bringing your team together. um, a- and it just it takes way more time than I ever thought it would. But
Mm,
it's fun.
mm. And when you get together, how often do you actually see your teams?
It varies for seeing the whole team. So I have teams in Europe, China, Singapore, the US. And so we don't get together as much as I would like, just because times are a little bit tough, right? And so we do a lot of biweekly calls, We have different work stream calls, but we try to get together at least every quarter. Be great if it could be more, but in reality, that doesn't always happen. So at least once or twice a year, if not more.
And what tips would you give the listeners to make the most of those interactions, those intentions?
I think you have to focus on business, but you got to focus on the team. How are we working? What's working? What's not working? Knowing people personally is super important, just to know what are their families like, what are their interests, what are their needs, how do they fit, and everybody's different. And so I think taking the time to build those relationships with each individual
Mm.
is critical in order for every person to be most effective in their role.
It's almost like it's an individual game. You pay attention to the individual leaders that are on your team specifically, because you're dealing with a lot of different leaders in global situations with many different cultures, but you pay attention to each person, not a one size fits all strategy.
Exactly. You can't, because they're all different and they all bring some sort of unique perspective, unique talent to the team.
Was that influenced by your best bosses? Who was your best boss?
My best boss,
And
very
current boss excluded, in your past lives, your best boss.
in my past life, early in my career, I was at Baxter. Her name
Mhm,
was Judy Braun. She was the head of talent and development.
mhm,
I think I was like a coordinator at the time, and she was amazing. And I still keep in contact with her after 20 some odd years. Um, she was an individual who she cared about me. There was trust. She empowered me to do my job. She gave me feedback that sometimes I didn't like.
mm,
Um, she also asked me for feedback about her, like how could we work better
mm,
together? Which, when you have more experience, you may not be as open. I was very early in my career and I shared what I felt, and she took that feedback to heart. She was very vulnerable with me in terms of what worked for her and what didn't. Um, and I think we had a very collaborative relationship in terms of building upon, as you're building, when you're in learning and development, it's creative, right? And so how do we do this together? It's not my job or your job, it's our job and our team. Um, and I'll never forget her. She was the best boss I ever had.
mm. She brought out the best in you,
Mhm.
better than you thought you even could be.
Better than I thought I could ever be.
Yeah, that's quite a testament to her. There's a couple things that you touched on that I'd like to expand on. Let's talk about trust. When you first get together with a new leader, or when a new leader is promoted, or a new leader to you, talk to me about that trust. I said in a former podcast that micromanagement is the opposite of trust. So how has her trust in you affected your current means and ways of trusting people, especially in a global remote situation? How do you build that trust? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, I think you have to get to know the person. You have to know what their strengths are, what their interests are. I also believe that you have to give people the opportunity to do what you need them to do,
Mm,
but also know that they, from a personal perspective, have that vulnerability of, if that doesn't work, give me another idea. Do your
mm,
job. I think you can do your job. You're getting paid well to do your job. I expect you to do your job. But if there's another way of doing it, let's talk about it, because I don't feel like I ever have all of the answers. So let's continue to collaborate on what the end result or the outcome might look like.
mm,
And I think trusting people, also in holding them accountable when things aren't going well, or when maybe things go askew a little bit, in terms of talking about it. Feedback is really critical, and I think it's timely feedback as well, of this isn't meeting my expectations, or I'm not sure I agree with you, or whatever the case might be. And so I think as you do.
yeah, it's interesting. It's feedback both ways.
Mhm,
Them about you and you about them at the
100.
same time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think having a more diverse way of thinking is going to get you a better outcome. So I might have in my head what I think is going to work, but they might have a different perspective. They might have a different upbringing. They might have different clients at the end of the day that it probably will be more effective if we think differently. So,
It's interesting because leadership, there's so many things about leadership that are subjective. There's not an obvious way moving forward for much of leadership or much of leadership decisions. And allowing like that person to bring forth their best selves, even if it's in progress,
mhm.
is what I'm hearing in terms of success for you and others. When you think about doing this, and I don't want to focus on the remote pieces of it, but I know it has changed from, down the hall, get a cup of coffee to now. Have you ever had a situation where do you like, first of all, do you tend to trust automatically, or does that build over time, or combination?
I think it's a combination. So I personally am someone who I give trust right away until it is taken away or something happens. I also think you always are sizing things up. What do I think? Do I trust? Do I go out on a limb? I don't know. But me personally, especially in one-on-ones, I give trust pretty easily until I see that something might be breaking that trust. And I think that's important for me, at least with having this remote role, is taking the extra time to get to know who people are, knowing that we don't see each other every day. The majority of my team is in Europe and Asia. And so
Mm,
with the time zone, I have literally a half a day for one-on-one meetings, and that's my whole morning. And so sometimes things can be delayed until the next day. And so we have to be very smart in terms of how do we address this situation? How do we make sure that we're moving in the right direction? And so whether it's through written communications, um, DMs, texts, whatever the case might be, I think you have to have an extra effort on communication so that people know that they can feel safe in terms of how things are going, or how they're feeling, or feedback, or whatever the case might be. So I think that's
mm.
where I have to spend a lot of extra time being a remote leader.
And you use the word vulnerability.
Mhm.
Is there a risk for vulnerability?
I think there's always risks for everything. I, I am a person that believes there's good in everything. And so I personally think you have to be vulnerable in order for people to know who you are and what you're all about. And so I'm going to do that because I don't feel like I can get to know you if I'm not being my true self. And I want to know who you are as an employee, as a person on my team. And I have to put down any falsities about myself in order to get to know you as well.
Because what I'm hearing is it's an individual game. This leader of leaders. And the more you know and understand what matters to an individual, what their potential can be, that's where the growth can be. But it's you as their boss paying attention even more. And it can be done globally and remotely. It just has to be done with more intention.
More intention. But that's who I am. Like I don't I don't play games. What you see is what you get. I don't have a poker face. I don't enjoy it. And so I think it's, I think for me, it's who I am.
Mm,
That's how, especially for people that are on my team, I just want to be who I am. I don't want to be somebody else.
mm, mm. So advice to increase the best boss, do you take that who you are and magnify it? How does your self-awareness and who you are come into play?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's not about who I am. It's about understanding who the rest of my team is,
Mm,
what makes them tick, where they have challenges, having some of those tough conversations in terms of feedback, um, figuring out how to best use those talents, how to push them beyond what they
mm,
can do to meet their goals. Sometimes it's tough feedback of there's not some self-awareness. So how do we do that in the right way? Um, and so that's my focus.
Focusing on the people and their potential, even if they don't see it themselves, and bringing their whole self forward. And truly, Paula, you're one of the best leaders I've ever met. I've known you for quite a few years now, and it's really an honor to get to talk with you, an honor for you to have on my podcast. And I sincerely appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that you see the team as the outcome, not the outcomes as outcomes first, team second. You see the people and really help understand what is not only what they can do, but who they are. Um,
Yeah.
it's a
Thank you.
pretty,
I've learned a lot from you as well, my friend.
thank you so much. Great to talk with you. I'm Diane Scott. This is a Best Pos podcast, and I thank so much Paula Neimann. So thank you so much. I'll be talking to you soon in the upcoming weeks.